Welcome to Ambassador in Town. Today, I am personally really delighted to have Ambassador Julia Longbottom of the United Kingdom as a scholar of British diplomatic history. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining our program.
You're welcome.
You were first posted to Tokyo in 1990 as a British diplomat. After 3 decades, you came back to Tokyo in March 2021. Is that correct?
That's right. Although I was here briefly from 2012 to 16 as minister.
You're right. As the first female ambassador to Japan from the UK. What are the biggest differences in your experiences here in Japan?
Well, Japan has a very special place in my heart and my husband's heart. When we came here first in 1989-90, we found a very charming country, a very welcoming and generous culture, and a beautiful country that was a delight to travel around and explore. So much of that has not changed. The special, charming, attractive Japan that we found that we were fascinated by is still very much the same.
Do you usually travel a lot when you are posted to Japan?
So we've always tried to travel in our free time to understand the place where we're living better, to explore its charms and get behind or beneath the surface. And yes, over the 30 plus years we've been coming to Japan, we've traveled a lot.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. First, there are some areas that haven't changed as much as you might have expected, or as I might have expected. And one of those is the position of women, the advancement of women in Japanese society. I think it is now beginning to change. And when I'm asked about it, I always say Japan has so many impressive women that I really encourage the sort of take up of their skills and their qualities as a great contribution to Japan's economy and society. So I will always encourage more participation and empowerment of women. The situation of this region, the security situation, the increasing instability and the shifts in Japanese government policy have probably been the biggest single change that I've experienced in the years I've been coming here.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, I feel that Japan has been always quite Anglophile country. So there are so many Japanese people who like to study in the UK and visit UK for their travel and also work in the UK as well. There are so many banks and business industries in the UK, like Nissan and Toyota.
Yes, yeah. No, absolutely. And, I think Japan's journey of internationalization, the pace at which Japan internationalizes can fluctuate. And certainly when I was here in the early 90s, it felt like a period when everybody in Japan wanted to speak English, wanted to study abroad, wanted to work for those international companies. I think it's a pity that over the 30 years, the 2 or 3 lost decades of much lower economic growth, it felt like that had been stopped somewhat. But I feel now that things are changing again, that there's a lot of interest, particularly after COVID, from young people in Japan to get out and take those opportunities that come from living and studying abroad, and I would really encourage as many people as possible to do that.
Yeah, last year when I was at Cambridge, your alma mater, I heard that because of some difficulties, there are now less Chinese students, but instead there are more Japanese students. So the balance is changing. Of course, previously there are much more Chinese students.
Yes, I mean, I suspect the number of Chinese students is still very high in the UK. Japan's got some way to go to catch up, and I encourage a bit more dynamism and interest in studying the UK. That'd be great.
Yeah, I agree. So let me move on to the second question
Yeah.
about the UK-Japan partnership. You said that the UK-Japan partnership is the strongest it has been in decades. I agree with it at your speech at the Japan National Press Club on the 6th April this year. As a scholar of British diplomatic history and the UK-Japan relations, I'm very glad to hear it. And I'm also very glad that the tie between the two countries now becomes really, really strong. The reciprocal access agreement between the UK and Japan of January this year and the Hiroshima Accord of May this year as well further strengthen this tie. Undoubtedly, you are at the center of these agreements, accomplishments. In your opinion, what made the partnership so strong between the two countries?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think it really is the strongest it's been for decades. And there have been a number of key moments along that journey. I was going to mention Margaret Thatcher, actually, who was the British Prime Minister at the time I first came to Japan. And interestingly, UK-Japan relations had gone through a pretty rocky patch, I think fueled by the fact that Japan had not sided with the UK in the Falklands War. And that Japan's great success in exporting its technology around the world was causing quite a significant imbalance in our trading relations. And Margaret Thatcher was very interested in all of this, but wanted to do something about it. And she decided that the answer was, and undoubtedly based on our shared values and worldview, that the answer was that Japan should play a more active role in promoting the international economic system and the rules-based system, and that we should build on that by encouraging Japanese investment into the UK and opening up the British market, which was a really big step for the British economy. And as you said, Nissan and Toyota, really valuable investments into our automotive industry. They've basically been the backbone of the UK's automotive industry since then. Really valuable relationships that were built from that point. But I think, a next key moment, and interestingly, I happened to be in Japan again at that time, was 2012-13, when Prime Minister Abe became Prime Minister for the second time. This time, he talked about, addressing another slight imbalance, which was that Japan had always played a key role then in the international economic norms and rules, but much less so in security and defence. And as a British diplomat, I'd been part of many conversations where we would often argue that it was time Japan stepped up a bit more and took on more of that burden, given that Japan benefited from so much that flowed from that economic system, and the international peace and security that others were putting more resource into securing. So I think that period, Prime Minister Abe's second premiership, I was reminded of a speech he made in London in September 2013, when he talked about the UK and Japan as a priori partners, natural partners. And he talked about his commitment to increase Japan's contribution to his proactive contribution to peace was his phrase, wasn't it? And I think what we're seeing now with the Hiroshima Accord agreed between our two prime ministers during the G7 summit is the next step. And it really does set out a highly ambitious, broad range of areas where, based on our shared interests and mindset, values, we are planning to do even more together.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Particularly, I think that the UK has been a kind of a model of our security role in international community, because the United States is a superpower. So we cannot do what the United States is doing militarily because of the difference of the size between the two countries. But I think that if we think about the side, Japan has been always regard the UK as a kind of a model So from that point of view, I think that the UK has been both encouraging and educating Japanese policymakers and some political leaders to think about what we can do in international community. So I think in the sense, particularly the UK-Japan relations is quite, mutually, reciprocally, quite beneficial to both countries.
I absolutely agree. There is a lot that both sides benefit from in working together. We often talk about the fact that the UK and Japan vote in the same way at the United Nations more often than any other pair of countries. But the size point is really interesting, and it was very striking when Prime Minister Abe decided to design a new National Security Council, develop a national security strategy, start to think about crisis management. The model, and he visited several times to look at the UK model, which seemed to be a very valuable input to the designs that were then put in place for Japan's national security architecture. And I think today there are many more areas where we can do that kind of work together.
And like strike fighter, UK and Japan are now beginning to develop quite significant new strike fighter. So I think this would further strengthen the tie between the two countries. So let me also move on to the question about the war in Ukraine, because UK has been playing a very important role within the international community in supporting Ukraine or Ukrainian efforts to defend its own country. Japan's government also played an important role in bringing the solidarity at the Hiroshima G7 summit meeting. What is at stake in this war from the UK's point of view? How do you evaluate this year's G7 leaders' statement on Ukraine issued at Hiroshima? UK has been at the center of these creation, I suppose.
Yeah. The war in Ukraine, or the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, is an absolute challenge to the rules-based international system that both the UK and Japan so depend on and are so committed to defending. It's an illegal invasion. It breaches international law and it breaches the UN Charter. And we have to, therefore, as two like-minded countries, to stand up against Russia's aggression and make sure that the outcome cannot be that Russia wins. It's been very impressive. The leadership, particularly of Prime Minister Kishida, in terms of Japan's approach to Ukraine. We understand that there are restrictions. Japan's hands are tied because of its law and constitution in terms of providing lethal aid. But Japan has done pretty much everything else it can to support Ukraine, and we really value that. It also seems to have had an impact on Japanese politics and public opinion in a way that, back in 1990, as a young diplomat, I could never have imagined. The day when the Japanese government decided to double Japan's defense spending to 2% of GDP, with significant support from the public and across the political spectrum. These are big shifts and changes which are very welcome to us, and in a field where, as in set out in the Hiroshima Accord, one of the three pillars of that accord is about stepping up our partnership in defence and security, where we are ready to work very closely with Japan. And the Indo-Pacific region, maybe you're going to come on to this actually, we can leave that. But
go ahead.
So, you mentioned working together with Japan and Italy to develop the next future fighter aircraft and systems. This is a really significant step, but it reflects our shared values and thinking, and the shared need for that particular capability, but also the mutual respect we have for each other's technology and skill sets, and our ability to work together. It will be a challenging project, but the fact is we've committed to doing it together, and I think that's a really big signal of the strength of the partnership.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. As a scholar of international relations as well as a historian, I usually say that UK-Japan relations is stronger than the time of the 1902 when the two countries created the alliance because of the mutual respect. Because around that time, the alliance was much more one-sided. Of course, UK is the most powerful country in the world. Japan was not so. But nowadays, I think the relationship is much more, I think much deeper and, well, based upon much deeper mutual understanding, mutual respect.
Yeah.
Around that time, it was difficult for the two countries because of the geographical differences, civilizational differences, to have such a deep mutual understanding. But nowadays, two countries can share so many things together.
Yeah, and yeah, as you say, everything we talk about nowadays is about partnership. And one of the words I like to use is complementarity.
Right.
And when the UK and Japan work together, we're much stronger often than when we work separately. So we each have real strengths, and we both have some areas of weakness. So whether it's in advanced manufacturing that we're partnering, in scientific research, in defense industry, or on climate change and renewable energy, or cybersecurity and digitalization. You know, you can see there are some areas where the UK is further ahead, some areas where Japan is further ahead, but where there is a strong desire across all of those areas for us to work together. Again, there's a lot of detail on all of this in the Hiroshima Accord. We recognise that this will benefit both countries, and we're very committed to doing more together.
Right. Right. Here comes my final question about the UK still to the Indo-Pacific region.
Yes.
You already touched upon the question a bit. It seems that you have been embodying UK's tilt to the Indo-Pacific as a British ambassador in the Indo-Pacific region. This concept first appeared in the integrated review of March 2021 when you arrived in Tokyo, I suppose. The UK's accession to the CPTPP should be seen as one of the great accomplishments of that policy. What do you expect Japan to contribute to the success of the UK tilt to the Indo-Pacific? I feel that UK need to have some clear gain from that UK tilt to the Indo-Pacific region. And CPTPP, of course, can be a good a kind of a leverage for the UK to gain more benefits out of that. But what Japan can do to strengthen UK's tilt to the Indo-Pacific region?
Really interesting question. And you're right that in March 2021, the British government launched the integrated review. It was a sort of manifesto of the role that the UK was determined to play in the world. It came on the back of Brexit and I guess some questions about the UK's role in the world and its ambition and commitment to other partners and the maintenance of peace and security. And it was very clear that the British government intends to continue that kind of leadership role, but that we can't do it on our own. We have to do it very much with our partners. And in terms of the regions of the world, of course, Europe, the Euro-Atlantic, and as Ukraine has shown, continues to be the priority for our own peace and security. It's our backyard, and there is no question about our commitment to security in Europe. But the Indo-Pacific was signalled very clearly as the region of the future, the region that is so critical to our economic prospects, to our security, and where resilient societies, open societies, are a very important factor, and we want to work with Japan and key partners in this region to shore those up. Japan is an absolutely pivotal country for us in this region. We often talk about Japan being our closest security partner in Asia, which it is. And it fits with the Indo-Pacific tilt. We're now clear that the tilt has happened and we're now very much engaged and committed in this region. I think we already have gained a lot by that, and we are very grateful for the response and the support we've had from the Japanese government for this policy. You mentioned CPTPP. We have had very strong support from the Japanese government. Of course, it had to play a role as an honest broker, as the chair of the UK's accession. But it has been, a very strong supporter of our accession. We've worked very effectively together, and we look forward to what the CPTPP can now become, and the role that we can play as a close partner of Japan in that organisation. We think it has a lot of potential to enhance the rules-based economic system and to enable us to grow the group of countries sharing the same trading rules in this region and more broadly. So I think that there's a lot to play for, but we're delighted with the response. The other example is the response to the visit of our carrier strike group in autumn 2021. We had even though it was in deep COVID times, made things very complicated, but the response, the welcome that we had from the Japanese system, but also from the Japanese people, I think was a really warm reminder of the depth of the relationship and the potential for the future.
It was a great decision to actually do it during the COVID. And I think undoubtedly the visit further strengthened the tie between the two countries. And also I think that the UK and Japan are the two leading countries which are trying to connect the two regions, I mean the Europe and Asia. And by Japanese and the UK's roles, the war in Ukraine, we can easily understand how the war would impact upon the security situation in this region. And the UK have been doing a very important role in doing it.
I mean, again, our leaders share very much the phrase or the statement that security of the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic are indivisible. And Ukraine, as you say, is a very good example of that. We know that other countries are watching what happens in Ukraine, and we can't afford for them to take the wrong message from our response. The other thing I would say is that at the NATO summit in Vilnius just recently, I was very struck by the strength of G7 unity and the statement that was made about the determination to continue supporting Ukraine and providing all the assistance it needs, including from Japan. And I think actually the strengthening of G7 unity has been another big phenomenon in foreign policy. Arguably since the UK hosted the Cornwall summit, and both of us as countries now outside major trading blocs, but wanting to play a significant role in the world, share the importance of the G7 for our country's future.
Thank you very much. We are very fortunate to have you here in Tokyo as a quite influential British diplomat within your government. And after 2 or 3 decades, I'm looking forward to reading the archival materials where we can know how you play such an important role in accomplishing so many accords and agreements.
I'm not sure that I can take much credit. What I would say is, as a young diplomat, maybe I spotted, you said embodied, I don't know, but spotted the importance of the Indo-Pacific. And when I actively chose Japan as my first overseas posting with my husband, who was working, we weren't married yet, but he was working in business, and we also saw the economic opportunity. Maybe, there was a little bit of foresight, and I still see myself very much as that youthful embodiment the UK-Japan relationship. And I hope, I'm not that young. I just hit a major milestone with a big birthday in the UK. I won't talk about what it was, but it's something to do with rebirth. So maybe, in my new era, I hope to continue to bring energy and ambition to our relationship and see just how much more we can do together. It's a very exciting time.
That's great. Thank you very much for choosing Japan, and thank you very much for joining our program today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed.